Yes, there's a break here.
Mm-hmm.
And this is very important. We have to know and begin to understand why Sri Aurobindo has put a break here. He didn't do it just without any thought. So we have to go through the text very carefully. And when there is a break, there should be a very slight pause. We begin with the line, but all is screened, subliminal, mystical. Now we know that subliminal means to operate below the threshold of sensation or consciousness. And so all is screened, subliminal, mystical. And Sri Aurobindo has a lot to say about the subliminal. And I would like to share some of that with you. It's so long that it would take the whole meeting today to read all that he has said, but it's very important. In the Life Divine, he tells us the real subconscious is neither diminished consciousness close to the inconscient. The real subconscious is a nether diminished consciousness close to the inconscient. The subliminal is a consciousness larger than our surface existence. But both belong to the inner realm of our being, of which our surface is unaware. So both are jumbled together in our common conception and parlance. Subliminal is a general term used for all parts of the being which are not on the waking surface. Subconscient is very often used in the same sense by European psychologists because they do not know the difference. But when I use the word, I mean always what is below the ordinary physical consciousness, not what is behind it. The inner mental, vital, physical, the psychic are not subconscious in this sense, but they can be spoken of as subliminal. Now, in this, from the Letters on Yoga, we see a very rare use by Sri Aurobindo of the I sense of his word. When I use the word, I mean. So this is very, very important. And he says again in the Letters on Yoga, it is true that the subliminal in man is the largest part of his nature and has in it the secret of the unseen dynamisms which explain his surface activities. But the lower vital subconscious, which is all that this psychoanalysis of Freud seems to know, and even of that it knows only a few ill-lit corners, is no more than a restricted and very inferior portion of the subliminal whole. And one more, the subliminal self stands behind and supports the whole superficial man. It has in it a larger and more efficient mind behind the surface mind, a larger and more powerful vital behind the surface vital, a subtler and freer physical consciousness behind the surface bodily existence. And above them, it opens to higher superconscient as well as below them to lower superconscient ranges. but all is screened, subliminal, mystical. It needs the intuitive heart, the inward turn. The intuitive heart concerns the spiritual vision or perception, something that is obtained through intuition rather than from reasoning or observation. And Sri Aurobindo closes the sentence with, it needs the power of a spiritual gaze. And those lines, those extraordinary lines, but all is screened, subliminal. It needs the intuitive heart, the inward turn. It needs the power of a spiritual gaze. And then he makes us look very deeply here. Else to our waking minds, small moment look. A goalless voyage seems our dubious course. Some chance has settled or hazarded some will, or a necessity without aim or cause. Before I continue, there's a lot to cover here because we have to understand what he is saying here. He is saying that chance, and he capitalizes it with a C, and he capitalizes the word will, as he always does. He says truthfully that in the essays on divine and human, chance is not in this universe. The idea of illusion is itself an illusion. There was never illusion yet in the human mind that was not the concealing, possibly shape and disfigurement of a truth. And then he says in Essays Divine and Human once again, what we call chance is a play of the possibilities of the infinite. So powerful. So this chance, which is not really chance, but it seems that way to us if we don't have the power of a spiritual gaze. And our waking mind, with its small moment look, seems to that this voyage is goalless. It doesn't have any goal, or the course is dubious, doubtful, that some chance has settled on or some will has hazarded. Now, what is this will? And we have to look at will for a while, because Sri Aurobindo uses it so often in Savitri. In the Life Divine, he says, the energy that creates the world can be nothing else than a will. And will is only consciousness applying itself to a work and a result. And then he says again in Life Divine, will is the pressure of a conscious force on nature. Sorry, that's Letters on Yoga. In Life Divine, he says, will becomes what becomes desire in the ego is will in the spirit. And I would like to share two things from the synthesis of yoga. The real motive power of the life of the soul is will. Desire is only a deformation of will in the dominant bodily life and physical mind. The essential turn of the soul to possession and enjoyment of the world consists in a will to delight. Very, very important. The essential turn of the soul to possession and enjoyment of the world consists in a will to delight. And the enjoyment of the satisfaction of craving is only a vital and physical degradation of the will to delight. It is essential that we should distinguish between pure will and desire, between the inner will to delight and the outer lust and craving of the mind and body. And then he says again, so poetically, the leader of the journey, the captain of the march, the first and most ancient priest of our sacrifice is the will. This will is not the wish of the heart, or the demand or preference of the mind, to which we often give the name. It is that inmost, dominant, and often veiled conscious force of our being and of all being, tapas, shakti, shraddha, that sovereignly determines our orientation, and of which the intellect and the heart are more or less blind and automatic servants and instruments. And Mother gives us one statement: will is power of consciousness turned towards effectuation. And then we have necessity. And we only have one comment from Sri Aurobindo that I was able to find, or two comments actually. Necessity is the child of the spirit's free self-determination. What affects us as necessity is a will which works in sequence and not a blind force driven by its own mechanism. What we call necessity is a truth of things working itself out in a time sequence of the infinite. So we'll go back just to these few lines. It needs the intuitive heart, the inward turn. It needs the power of a spiritual gaze. Else, to our waking minds, small moment look, a goalless voyage seems our dubious course. Some chance has settled or hazarded some will, or a necessity without aim or cause, unwillingly compelled to emerge and be. Oh, then he speaks to us of this field of life where we are now. In this dense field where nothing is plain or sure, our very being seems to us questionable. Our life, a vague experiment. The soul, a flickering light in a strange, ignorant world. And this is so poignant, actually, because then he says the earth, a brute mechanic accident, a net of death in which by chance we live. Well, yes, I know this is not easy to read. Of course, for us who have found a higher destiny than this, which questions our very being, and in a field where nothing is plain or sure, where our life becomes just a vague experiment. The soul is simply a flickering light in a strange, ignorant world. To flicker means to vibrate unsteadily, to flutter. So that's the soul to many people, if they even believe in a soul. And the earth, a brute mechanic accident. A brute here, I would feel, is lacking reason or intelligence, a senseless, almost a senseless mechanic accident. Mechanic here is habitual, routine, automatic accident, a net of death in which by chance we live. All we have learned appears a doubtful guess. The achievement done, a passage or a phase whose farther end is hidden from our sight, a chance happening or a fortuitous fate. Fortuitous is sort of lucky or happening by chance, accidental. And then he says, out of the unknown, we move to the unknown. We, I believe, could agree that this is the feeling of most of the world's people. To live, to exist, often under poverty, often under the pressure of war and violence, often under drugs, alcohol, and other things. That they don't see any farther end to this life. It's hidden from our sight. Even when something is achieved, it's a passage or a phase or a chance happening or even a lucky fate. And therefore, out of the unknown, we move to the unknown. Now he will continue a little longer here, telling us, ever surround our brief existence here, gray shadows of unanswered questionings. The dark, in conscience, signless mysteries stand up, unsolved, behind fate's starting line. Now, we have to go deeply into his definitions of inconscient. But what does surround our brief existence here? Even for many of us, there are unanswered questionings. There's sort of gray shadows. And these signless mysteries of this dark inconscient stand up unsolved behind the starting line of fate. So we have a few minutes, and I'd like to read quite a lot from the inconscient because it's one of the most important aspects of this yoga. In his letters on Savitri, and you know he spent so many hours each night replying to disciples and devotees. To one person alone, he wrote 4,500 letters. 4,500 letters. He says in this letters on Savitri, the inconscient and the ignorance may be mere empty abstractions and can be dismissed as irrelevant jargon if one has not come in collision with them or plunged into their dark and bottomless reality. But to me, they are realities, concrete powers whose resistance is present everywhere and at all times in its tremendous and boundless mass. Just apply that sentence or two sentences to the world situation today. Again, from the letters on yoga, 3 more statements. In its actual cosmic manifestation, the Supreme, being infinite and not bound by any limitation, can manifest in itself, in its consciousness of innumerable possibilities, something that seems to be the opposite of itself, something in which there can be darkness, inconscience, inertia, insensibility, disharmony, and disintegration. It is this that we see at the basis of the material world and speak of nowadays as the inconscient ocean of the Rig Veda, in which the One was hidden and arose in this form of the universe, or as it is sometimes called, the non-being, Asat. The inconscient itself is only an involved state of consciousness, which, like the Tao or Shunya, though in a different way, contains all things suppressed within it, so that under a pressure from above or within, all can evolve out of it. An inert soul with a somnambulist force. The inconscient is the last resort of the ignorance. In his essays in philosophy and yoga, he tells us the body, we have said, is a creation of the inconscient, and itself inconscient, or at least subconscient in parts of itself and much of its hidden action. But what we call the inconscient is an appearance, a dwelling place, an instrument of a secret consciousness, or a superconscient, which has created the miracle we call the universe. And lastly, again from the letters on Savitri. Men have not learned yet to recognize the inconscient, on which the whole material world they see is built, or the ignorance of which their whole nature, including their knowledge, is built. They think that these words are only abstract metaphysical jargon flung about by philosophers in their clouds, or labored out in long and wearisome books like the Life Divine. And lastly, is it really a fact that even the ordinary reader would not be able to see any difference between the inconscient and ignorance, unless the difference is expressly explained to him? This is not a matter of philosophical terminology, but of common sense and the understood meaning of English words. One would say even the inconscient stone, but one would not say, as one might of a child, the ignorant stone. One must first be conscious before one can be ignorant. Oh. What is true is that the ordinary reader might not be familiar with the philosophical content of the word inconscient, and might not be familiar with the Vedantic idea of the ignorance as the power behind the manifested world. But I don't see how I can acquaint him with these things in a single line, even with the most illuminating image or symbol. He might wonder, if he were Johnsonianly minded, how an inconscient could be teased, or how it could wake ignorance. I am afraid, in the absence of a miracle of inspired poetical exegesis flashing through my mind, he will have to be left wondering. Wonderful sense of humor that we have from Sri Aurobindo.